On a remote Indonesian island, scientists dug deep into the past and found something they couldn't explain. A tiny skeleton unlike anything ever seen before.
A team of Australian and Indonesian archaeologists has discovered the remains of what's believed to be a new species of human.
These bones challenge all we know about human origins.
It's truly mind-boggling.
It implies that we are missing a huge amount of the story of human evolution.
This challenges our preconceptions in so many ways. This is a major discovery.
Barely a metre tall, they called it the Hobbit. But the claim that this was a new member of the human family sparked a bitter dispute.
It just invites tremendous skepticism.
I don't believe it.
There is only one skull, so that's not a proof of anything at all.
It's either one of the great discoveries of science or one of its greatest blunders.
It must be a mistake because they got it wrong.
Reputations, entire careers are at stake.
One group of people are going to be 100% wrong. So it is really quite an extreme case.
Only now has evidence emerged to solve the Hobbit enigma. And the answer is scientific heresy.
At the present, every textbook on the planet is wrong.
She's the little creature that rewrites the story of humankind. The astonishing discovery of what may be a new human species took luck, but it was no accident. The journey began on the far north coast of Australia, in the remote Kimberley region. Professor Mike Morwood had spent years here, investigating what may be the oldest culture on Earth. This rock art is without precedent anywhere on Earth. Around 30,000 years ago, these remarkable images sprang as if from nowhere.
I think these little moldy barbs, you can't really see what's underneath here, but there's some spears, so there's obviously a lot of art underneath these mermaid figures, eh? Yeah.
Who were these people? These dancers? These fishermen? This mysterious civilization painted deer, an animal unknown in the fossil record of Australia, but well known in Asia. Morwood believed that's where the rock artists had come from.
There's clearly the Asian connection is an important part of Kimberley prehistory. And if you're interested in the most basic questions in Australian archaeology, when did people come here? Where did they come from? Who were they? Then you've got to go offshore. And specifically, I thought maybe we'd start working the adjacent islands.
Morwood hoped to find evidence of the rock artists' ancestors, but there was a problem. Between the Asian and Australian mainland lies a chain of 17,000 volcanic islands. The evidence he was after could be hidden on any one of them. A team of Indonesian and Dutch scientists provided the first clue. In the mid-90s, they were investigating fossils on the island of Flores. Amid the bones of ancient elephants, they discovered something else. Unmistakable signs of another presence. These stone tools may look unremarkable, but they were the breakthrough that led to the amazing Hobbit discovery.
There were indications that they were at least 700,000 years old. So that started off my first association with Flores.
Flores is the island that time forgot, It's been isolated from the Asian mainland for millions of years. It sits to the east of the Wallace Line, the biological divide separating Asia from Australia. The line marks a formidable barrier. Treacherous currents prevent most animals from crossing over. To the west, it's a land of tigers. To the east, it's kangaroos. Modern humans only reached these islands in the last 50,000 years. Yet the mysterious stone tools were nearly 1 million years old. Some unknown human ancestor must have crossed the Wallace Line.
So the idea that somehow a pre-modern hominid had the capacity to get out to these islands, was almost archaeological heresy.
The strange stone tools failed to convince the scientific world. Morwood and his Indonesian colleagues needed more evidence. The search led them to Liang Bua. The locals call it the Cold Cave, and it's long been a refuge from the tropical heat and storms.
My first impression was that this is the best archaeological prospect I have ever seen in my 30-year career.
Bedrock here lies far below the cave floor, allowing the scientists to dig deep into the past. No one in Asia had ever dug so deep before, because the assumption was there'd be nothing to find. They hoped to uncover signs of the primitive toolmakers, but the odds of success were slim. The team sank a series of narrow shafts, removing tons of rock and soil, sieving every grain for fossil evidence. In the shifting sediment, it was potentially dangerous work.
It's basically like a mine shaft. You have to learn how to do mining. And we needed that for Indonesia because we're going now 16, 17 meters underground. You need to make sure that things that are coming in on your head aren't going to it's not going to happen. Otherwise you'll end up dead. Somebody will end up dead.
2 years of digging uncovered animal bones and more stone tools. But it was not until they reached 6 meters down that they were rewarded with solid evidence. A tiny arm bone of unknown origin.
Our bone identification person was just totally puzzled. And Rockus was adamant that this was a pre-modern hominid, but with one bone and no consensus of what it might represent. What could we do?
They kept on searching, expanding the excavation into one of the biggest in Asia.
Kita membangun sebuah network yang lebih besar, bukan hanya arkeologi, bukan hanya para arkeolog, tapi juga melibatkan berbagai ilmuwan yang berasal dari berbagai disiplin ilmu, seperti dari geologi, dari geomorfologi, dan juga dari palynologi atau pollen.
This is the mandible.
Despite their efforts, a further season yielded just a single enigmatic tooth. Slim reward for all the effort. The search for the ancient toolmakers was running short of time and money.
I had to leave early to go back to Jakarta to settle the financial business and so on. So I left a few days before the scheduled end of the excavation.
Indonesian team members Thomas Sutikna and Rokas Duiawe continued the search.
Every night I was phoning up the excavation team. A couple of days later, after I left, I phoned them up and Thomas said, very excitedly, we have the skeleton of a pre-modern human child. They were really chuffed. Rokas was 200% certain that this was a pre-modern individual. It had no forehead, it had significant brow ridges, it didn't have a chin and so on.
They'd found the holy grail of archaeology, an almost complete skeleton. It was tiny, but this was no child. The wisdom teeth were exposed and worn. It was the remains of an adult woman, thousands of years old.
When I first heard that it was an adult, and according to Rockus about 1 metre tall, the height of a 5-year-old, I was stunned. I had to think about what the implications were.
The little creature was so different, they named her as a unique species, Homo floresiensis. But it was the nickname that stuck. The Hobbit. About 1 metre tall, with short legs and big feet. Her chinless jaw was full of strange teeth. And she was not alone. The first Hobbit was surrounded by fragments from a dozen others, including a second, complete lower jaw. The main skeleton was now called LB1, for Liang Bua 1. The pits were full of charcoal and butchered animals. The hobbits had been fire-using hunters. And as the team began examining the finds, the surprises kept coming. Peter Brown has spent decades studying Asian hominid fossils. Morwood enlisted his help to decipher the discovery. They flew to Jakarta for their first face-to-face meeting with a hobbit.
Colour drained from Peter's face. You know, he didn't say anything, but I knew he was pretty moved, you might say, by what he was looking at.
It was apples and oranges. It was totally outside the range of modern human variation. There's no way it could have been a modern human. It was very, very clear-cut.
The most astounding feature was immediately apparent. Homo floresiensis had a tiny brain case, smaller than a newborn baby, smaller even than a chimpanzee.
When I first measured the brain volume of Homo floresiensis, my colleagues reported that I went into a sweat, got very, very flushed and was obviously flabbergasted and flummoxed. And so I remeasured it. I continued to be amazed.
The hobbit's skull held a brain that was only 400 cubic centimetres. A modern human's is 3 times this size. She seemed to be a throwback to the first hominid ancestors walking on 2 legs.
Bipeds with brains the same size as Homo floresiensis last walked the planet round about 2.5 to 3 million years ago in Africa. So it's been a long time since anything like this was around.
Some remnant of a primitive African ancestor marooned on an Asian island was the stuff of science fiction.
If Mike had said to me that remains of an alien spacecraft had been found in Central Flores, I would have been more accepting of that than I would of this particular fossil. Never been anything like it ever found before.
If they were to make any sense of it at all, the team urgently needed to date the discovery. Bert Roberts is a specialist in the techniques of dating ancient fossils.
My speciality is luminescence dating. That's where we actually look at when the sediments were last exposed to sunlight and entered the cave. And that's great because then you can work out the burial age of the individual. So straight away we started working on the sediments surrounding LB1. And we came up with a date of less than 30,000 years. So 30,000 years was remarkable because not only was that much younger than we'd expected, but it also brought it into the period in which modern humans, our species, had been running around Southeast Asia. So suddenly this species of human could have bumped into us, certainly, in Flores at that time.
If they were right, we'd been sharing the planet with a very different kind of human. Ralph Holloway has spent a lifetime fitting enigmatic fossils into the timeline of evolution. For him, the scale of the Hobbit enigma was immediately apparent.
The brain size has almost tripled in the course of human evolution. If we try and take Homo erectus and put it in the timeline, we're going to move it up here right before we come to Homo sapiens modern. And to find a brain size that is the size of a chimpanzee is really, an extraordinary detail that does not seem to fit. We would certainly have to put aside all of our previous concepts of precisely how human evolution occurred.
The Discovery team was fearful they'd got it wrong, so they checked the dates using different techniques. Geochronologist Chris Turney is a world expert in radiocarbon dating. He can pinpoint a fossil's age almost to the precise year.
The main find was equivalent of 18,000 years. I was over the moon, blown away. I was desperate to go and tell anyone, but I couldn't because none of the other team was there. I was desperate for a drink, but the pubs were all closed. So I just walked around the conference the next day with this dirty man's grin and couldn't say anything to anyone. It was mind-blowing. This was a creature who outlasted Neanderthals in Europe, that was kicking around the doorsteps of Australia till at least 10,000 years ago.
The dates withstood every test. Whatever it was, the inexplicable hobbit was with us until virtually yesterday.
Here was something so small, so primitive, that lived in the modern world until really an eye blink in time before modern times. When modern humans were already around, there was this creature living in the highlands of Flores.
She was the wrong creature, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. But just as the Discovery team began its search for an explanation, the precious bones disappeared. Professor Tuku Jakob had been the preeminent figure in Indonesian anthropology for a generation. He had a reputation for claiming discoveries for himself. And when a man of his stature came calling for the hobbit, no one in Indonesia could refuse him. Jakob removed the bones to his own laboratory, dismissing them as insignificant, just the remains of a modern human.
So everything is the direction of Homo sapiens, and I'm sure about it.
Professor Jakob had his supporters too. Flown to Indonesia by a TV show, they were equally dismissive of the find.
Yes. This thing is crystal clear, no shades of grey at all. It's a modern human, albeit one with many problems.
According to the skeptics, the Discovery team had made a ghastly blunder.
They seem to lack the capacity to recognise a village idiot when they see one.
Professor Jakob was eventually forced to return the precious bones to their home at Indonesia's National Centre for Archaeology. But his influence ensured that the dig at Liang Bua was suspended. With the digging stopped, the arguments raged. The hobbit became the most contentious claim in science. The skeptics had a simple solution for the hobbit enigma. It was just a diseased or pathological modern human. Nothing more than a sick pygmy.
Because the brain is so small, then there is something really unusual about the hobbit. I think the most likely explanation for that small brain is pathology.
Based on other specimens, then the most logical conclusion is that this is something modified by a disease.
The doubters believed the most likely pathology was microcephaly. a rare medical condition that prevents the brain from growing normally. History records some extreme instances of the condition. The most famous example is Bébé, an 18th century court jester who performed for French nobility.
Là, par exemple, et puis la zone de la face inférieure.
Fully grown, he was even smaller than the Hobbit, with a shrunken brain but otherwise normal proportions. Was the Hobbit someone like this? Radiologists at the Mallinckrodt Institute have been working with paleoanthropologist Dean Falk, comparing the Hobbit brain with microcephalics.
This is a copy of Hobbit skull, as a matter of fact. You know that the brain lives in here, inside the head. And what we can do is make a cast of the inside of the brain case. And here, in this case, is Hobbit's so-called endocast. And one thing we can say right off is if you look at overall shape, Hobbit's brain looks nothing like the shape of a microcephalic human being.
The frontal lobes control our emotions and personality. Microcephalics tend to have narrow, pointed lobes, but LB1s are wide and flat.
The overall brain shape of LB1 is the opposite of what you see in microcephalics. We are convinced, and we've shown with data and measurements, we're convinced that it's not at all anything like a microcephalic human being.
And while studying the endocast, Falk made a startling discovery. The Hobbit's brain appears to have been rewired for intelligence.
When my team first studied this endocast of Hobbit, we actually had preconceived biases or ideas. We thought that because of its tiny size, we would be seeing something that looked like the brain of an ape. And to our surprise, that turned out not to be the case at all. Instead, there are numerous features that are unique and advanced in LB1's brain. For instance, if you look at the front, which you're now looking at, it's very wide, side to side, squared off, but there are two large bulges here, convolutions, and they're in a really important part of the brain for higher thinking or higher cognition.
This rewired brain may help explain what the skeptics say is an apparent anomaly. No small-brained pre-human has ever been associated with stone tools like those found at Liangbua.
If you go back in time to find a 400cc individual, let's say 3 million years ago or so, he or she didn't make tools. They didn't make any tools. They were incapable of making tools. And therefore, my contention, just my contention, is that even if it proves to be a new species, it did not make those artifacts at Liangbua. Homo sapiens sapiens did.
Mom, I have one!
But the evidence on the ground tells a different story. Mark Moore has been investigating the many tools found around Liangbua.
One of the best ways to learn about stone tools is to go try to make them yourself. Now, Jat Miko and I have come down to the gravel bars of the Wei Wuchang to look at the problems that Homo floresiensis faced in producing pieces that she could use, small enough to carry, from these really quite large stones that are here on the gravel bar. So we're going to try it ourselves. The stone tools at Liangbua are extremely sophisticated in the sense that those hominins were very good at knapping stone. They understood all the geometric aspects of where to strike the stone, how to follow the high mass on the ridge of the core to make sure that you get off decent flakes. They were very, very good at that. And in that sense, these stone tools are very sophisticated. However, if you compare them to stone tools that tend to be made by modern humans in other parts of the world, these are very simple in that respect. And what we have found is very similar napping techniques in Africa with those early hominins as we find on Flores. So if a small-brained hominid could make those sorts of tools in Africa, there is no particular reason why a small-brained hominid could not make the stone tools that we see at Liangbua Cave.
Another vital clue to the Hobbit's origins are its teeth. Because even though the rest of the skeleton might be distorted by disease, the teeth rarely alter. Shara Bailey specializes in fossil dentition.
When I first went to Indonesia, I thought it would be a very simple task. I thought it was just a matter of taking a look and I'd be able to tell without a doubt. And it became very complicated as time went on, and so it's a conundrum.
Fortunately, there are two sets of hobbit teeth to compare. The skull of LB1 and the complete lower jaw, or mandible, of another, LB6.
I originally, when I saw LB1, I thought, well, this is just pathological. It's just a strange premolar, and the molars are modern. And then when they showed me the second one and it had the exact same premolar, I was really perplexed.
It seemed improbable that the Discovery team had stumbled upon two tiny individuals, both suffering from the same rare disease.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Shara asked developmental biologist Tim Bromwich to help.
The structure of bones and teeth tell a huge amount about the life history of an organism. And they can also settle disagreements about whether the tissue is normal or comes from someone with a pathological disturbance immediately.
The skeptics see nothing exceptional about the teeth.
There isn't a single tooth that has something that is outside the range of modern humans.
This is absurdity. Every single tooth in the jaw has been systematically affected in a way that adapts these teeth to that jaw.
Bromwich sees something very unusual in the teeth. Each one has altered in length front to back to fit within the small jaw. All have transformed in the same way. And that's not disease at work. That's evolution.
There is no pathology that I'm aware of that so completely and utterly transforms every bit of the skeleton and every single tooth in the mouth. There just isn't one.
None of these features are found in modern human mandibles. None of the critics have been able to find a modern human mandible which has these features, and they're motivated to try and find an example, but haven't been able to. They're just so distinctive.
Perhaps there were signs elsewhere in the skeleton that pointed to pathology. But if there were, then paleoanatomist Bill Youngers couldn't find them.
I can't pretend to be unbiased in this. I've spent the last 2 years examining the entire postcranial skeleton. And I think that the arguments for pathology fail in every single respect. The evidence is now pretty persuasive that we're looking at a new species.
Still, an extraordinary claim requires extraordinary proof. A final piece of the puzzle was missing. A smoking gun to put the question beyond reasonable doubt. For Matt Tochery, hands are a consuming passion. His hobby is piano. His profession is the study of bones in our hands and feet.
over half of all the bones in our skeleton are in our hands and feet, and so they tell a big portion of the story of our evolutionary history.
His special interest is the small bones of the wrist, the carpals, time capsules revealing the changes in primate evolution over millions of years.
You can imagine after spending 5 years of my life, for my PhD dissertation looking nothing but these wrist bones from humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, baboons, you name it, plus all the hominin fossils that we have. You can imagine for me where I've looked at hundreds of each of these different species wrist bones. I mean, after a while, you really start keying in.
And what he's discovered is that the human wrist is quite different to that of apes and our ancestors.
It basically has a lot to do with a particular bone in the wrist, and that bone is the trapezoid. And that's the wrist bone that sits right underneath your index finger, right here. And it's lodged between several other wrist bones. And in African apes and other non-human primates, that bone is shaped kind of like a pyramid, triangular shape, where the tip of the pyramid is facing out of the palm.
In apes, the forward-facing trapezoid passes force up and down the hand. Good for hanging on branches or cracking nuts, but it makes it difficult to bring the thumbs and fingers together with any precision.
But in us, what's happened is the wrist has been redesigned so that we're now more efficient at passing loads across this way.
And that makes it easier for us to hold objects with a precision grip. Our hand is built for complex tasks.
This is a very big difference compared to all our non-human primate relatives. So this was a great test to look at the wrist bones from Homo floresiensis, and does it look like humans and Neanderthals, or does it look like earlier hominins and African apes?
Was the wrist ancient, or was it modern? Here was the test to finally establish the hobbit's origins.
I was more surprised than anyone when I looked at it and realized it's a dead ringer for what we see in earlier hominins and African apes.
No modern human, not even a pygmy or a microcephalic, has the distinctive wrist of an ape or human ancestor.
I've measured skeletons of pygmies from Africa, from the Andaman Islands, throughout Southeast Asia. There's not a single human being on Earth that has the wrists of an Australopithecus or a chimpanzee.
Here was the evidence that resolved the mystery.
Homo floresiensis, the hobbits, as far as we know right now, they're the real deal.
There are people still out there that believe in a flat Earth, and if anybody wants to believe that Homo floresiensis is a pathological modern human of Australopithecus type, of dwarf stature related to the small people up the road, I have no problem with that. Okay, but the evidence says otherwise.
The Hobbit can no longer be dismissed. It's a real enigma. Even the most skeptical consider it worth the journey to Liangbua to see for themselves. Some of the world's leading scientists have been invited to visit the now famous cave.
Homo floresiensis was found not here but over there.
Yeah,
right?
over there, the sector 7.
Yeah,
And
but not up here on the surface, deep.
Yeah, deep, about 6 meters. Yeah.
The Hobbit poses a challenge for all of them because it exposes an uncomfortable truth about the science of human origins. There are huge gaps in our knowledge. Our theories of human evolution are based on surprisingly little evidence. Perhaps 200 skulls, half a dozen skeletons, and a confusing pile of fossil fragments. All we have to explain 7 million years of evolution.
Despite decades of patient work in pitiless places, we still know rather little about the evolution of humanity.
As the editor of the science journal Nature, Henry G. reviews the leading research in anthropology.
The remains we have are very scarce and very meagre, and that means that there are probably lots of different species that existed, that came into being, that lived for hundreds of thousands of years and then became extinct, and we know nothing about them. And all you need is just one to completely blow apart your well-entrenched, comfortable idea of the linear progress of evolution.
Until now, that entrenched position has been based on two unshakable assumptions. Firstly, that the savannas of Africa were the cradle of humankind. And secondly, the development of a bigger brain is what set humans apart from all other animals.
That's what it is. It's about a big brain. The expansion of the brain under constant pressure has been going on for at least 2 million years.
The problem with the Hobbit is that it makes a nonsense of these two accepted certainties, and a few careers as well.
It raises questions which would destroy, for some people, a huge amount of work.
Some of our critics find this hard to swallow. It doesn't fit with their preconceived ideas about the onward, upward progress of human evolution. And Homo erectus, as a metre-tall individual with long arms, short legs and a small brain, has no business being here 12,000 years ago. I think the shock of something so unexpected with such unique traits is too much for some people to swallow.
A global effort is now underway trying to make sense of the inexplicable Hobbit. And top of the list is explaining that tiny brain.
This is one of the most challenging aspects of the find, the small brain size and how we explain it. And I think this is part of the problem. In arriving at this creature, what was the ancestor?
The Hobbit didn't just fall from space. It evolved from an earlier ancestor. To understand it, we need to know who. And that means searching the fossil record for signs of the Hobbit's predecessors. Prime suspect is Homo erectus, the first human thought to have expanded beyond Africa. A fire-using, tool-making hunter, but tall and big-brained. Could Erectus have been Hobbit's ancestor? He was certainly in the right place at the right time. The first Erectus was discovered next door to Flores, Java Man. He's more than 1.5 million years old. John de Vos and Robin Dennell are specialists in the study of Indonesian fossils.
The significance of Erectus is that it's supposed to be the first type of human ever to live outside Africa. That according to long-standing views, around about 1.8 million years ago, it left its African homeland and dispersed across Asia and eventually reached Java, maybe around 1.5, 1.6 million years ago.
But can we turn evolution on its head and make a small-brained hobbit from a large-brained ancestor? John de Vos believes we can, because it's happened before.
I was not surprised by the size of Homo floresiensis.
because it fits in the pattern we find on the islands, not only on Flores but also on the islands of the Mediterranean.
Isolated islands are nature's laboratories. Strange things happen to the few animals that swim ashore.
Here I have the pygmy stegodon from Timor.
Wow, isn't that small? Just shows what happens on islands, doesn't it?
Flores is a prime example of island evolution. Here, rats grow as big as dogs. Lizards became giant Komodo dragons. And the fossil remains show elephants that shrunk to become pygmy stegodon, no bigger than a cow. The Dutch Museum is full of examples of such evolutionary magic. De Vos believes the island effect turned Homo erectus into a hobbit.
All those characters of the hobbit you can explain in the island phenomena.
So you're saying that's an island endemic form?
Yes.
But Dennell is not convinced. The island effect has never been known to shrink a human brain.
I'm saying you have a very small piece of a jigsaw puzzle and we don't even know what the picture looks like.
But we have facts and we have a simple explanation.
But unfortunately, there's nothing simple about the hobbit. After studying the bones, Bill Youngers sees no sign of a shrunken Java man.
I'm less and less persuaded that this is some kind of dwarfed Homo erectus. I suspect that we're looking at an ancestry that even predates Homo erectus.
It's forcing the scientists to consider another, even stranger possibility.
The more interesting scenario is that the hobbit was already small when it arrived, and perhaps its own ancestry goes back to something at the very base of the evolution of our own genus.
Prime suspect number 2, Australopithecus. Hobbit-sized in both body and brain, it walked upright, but is otherwise so primitive it's not even considered human. The most famous example of Australopithecine is Lucy, found in the 1970s in Ethiopia. She's more than 3 million years old. But there's one catch. As far as we know, Lucy never holidayed on an Indonesian island. She never left Africa. But we may have to rethink that. Youngers took a cast of some of Lucy's bones to Jakarta to compare them to the hobbit. And the result was startling. He joined together the 3 million-year-old sacrum from Lucy with the hobbit's 18,000-year-old pelvis.
I was shocked.
Despite being separated by millions of years, they were a perfect fit.
I'm amazed by how similar Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, that one specimen is, to LB1. The humerus is almost identical in length. The femur is almost identical in length. The pelvic morphology is now turning out to be very similar in size and shape.
It's an astounding idea. Could the hobbit somehow be a surviving relative of a primitive ancestor from the very beginning of all humanity?
Now that would be absolute heresy. No one has yet suggested an Australopithecine came out of Africa. This might be the first remnant Australopithecine to have escaped from Africa. No time recently, 2 million years ago, maybe 3 million years ago, and then gets stranded out there on this tiny little island, leaving no remains anywhere else throughout southern Asia, apart from this one cave that we just happened to dig in.
And that might imply that there is in fact a hidden Asian lineage of hominins that is only recorded so far in Flores at the very end of its trajectory. Given how little we know about Asia, at present that scenario cannot be ruled out.
Dennell believes we've been dazzled by the out-of-Africa theory, overlooking an alternative he calls Savannistan, the vast grass plains that once covered the planet from Africa to China, Many animals spread across this corridor. Why not early humans too?
Why I suggest the Savannah Star is to point out that those Asian grasslands are in fact far older and more extensive than those in Africa. And so one could advance the argument that maybe the Asian grasslands also played a major part in the early part of our own evolution.
It's a radical theory, but once again, not so unlikely, given how little we really know.
You see, the fossil evidence we have from Asia for the first million years or so of our existence would more or less cover this table, but a little more. And if we go back to 2 million years ago, or beyond that, we have absolutely nothing. So who knows what was living outside Africa at 2 million years ago?
First, she upset notions about the primacy of the bigger brain. Now she forces us to consider a staggering new possibility about the beginning of our species.
It raises all kinds of questions about where the human line began, and it could be used to support the idea that humans originated outside of Africa. Again, a very challenging idea.
Is the Hobbit telling us that Asia is the real birthplace of humankind? Before accepting such a revolutionary theory, we'd need more evidence. And on the western fringe of Asia, in the shadow of the Caucasus Mountains, they may have found just that. Here in the grounds of a medieval monastery, there's been a find almost as astonishing as Flora's. Dmanisi has yielded discoveries which, just like the Hobbit, are shaking the accepted notions of human evolution. Digging deep beneath the monastery, archaeologist David Lord Kipanitsa unearthed a treasure trove of extraordinary fossils.
This is a unique place where we could learn a lot about human evolution. The chapters we never can imagine to learn even.
Over the past decade, Professor Lord Kipanitsa has discovered not one, but 4 unique skulls. And just like the Hobbit, they are small, with small brains too.
This is the original Dmanisi skull. It was a very big surprise when we found it. It's very small with a very teeny brain capacity. If we will compare it with modern humans, they are much more primitive. It has brain capacity 600 cubic centimeter, then modern humans have more than 1500. So this skull is first human out of Africa. They are oldest humans in whole Eurasia.
The Dmanisi skulls are much older than the Hobbit, at least 1.7 million years, leaving time enough, perhaps, to have evolved into something quite different.
This skull belongs to the hominid who could be possible ancestor of the Homo erectus and Flores too.
The finds at Dmanisi in Georgia are remarkable, and they just go to show everything that's true about paleoanthropology, which is you find the most unexpected things in the most unexpected places.
Here was another astonishing discovery, challenging the accepted story of human origins.
comparison of Flores and Manisi could tell a lot about human evolution. We could say that human evolution was not just simple straight highway. It was very complicated, it's a very exciting story, and Flores and Manisi both are bringing new questions.
Professor Morwood has come to Paris to try and answer at least some of those questions.
The scapula and humerus are quite different from us.
In honour of his team, the Museum of Mankind has commissioned sculptor Elizabeth Daines to reconstruct the Hobbit, based on the latest forensic techniques. The Discovery team has convincing evidence Homo floresiensis is not a sick pygmy. They have some plausible explanations for her small brain. And the finds in Georgia confirm that in Asia, we should now expect surprises. The human family has a new member, a reminder that for most of our time on this planet, we've shared it with others.
And it shows that nature, in a sense, was experimenting with how to be human. And what's most fascinating here is that most of those very early experiments vanished 2 million years ago, and they evolved into other things or they went extinct. But here we've got something which may represent that very early stage of human evolution, going its own separate evolutionary way, maybe for 2 million years. So it's a quite incredible story.
For countless generations, the Hobbit flourished on her island refuge, before lying down one last time. Her passing left us alone, the solitary survivor of nature's many experiments. Or perhaps not.
The world is full of undiscovered hominids, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if somebody sent a paper to Nature saying they'd found one alive somewhere in Sumatra or Vietnam or somewhere. I would be very, very excited, but I wouldn't be at all surprised.
So what do you reckon about this? How much deeper are you going to go, Thomas?
Mike Morwood, Thomas Satikna, and their colleagues are already planning further ambitious excavations.
This will stand Southeast Asian archaeology on its head and will yield other spectacular discoveries of a similar magnitude to Homo floresiensis. Of that I'm certain.
The cool cave of Liangbua has only just begun to reveal its secrets. And there are thousands like it throughout Asia. We've only glimpsed a few pages of the human story.